today would be a great day. That he wants to be your satisfaction, but he also wants to be your deliverer, and he wants to set you free. And so Paul, man, he meets this woman, and what happens is whenever the spirit comes out of her and she comes to her right mind and she begins to follow Jesus, it upsets the people that she was rolling with. And that happens. This is on brand even to this day. Some of you're gonna make a decision to follow Christ, and it's gonna upset your drug dealer. It's gonna upset the people that you hang out with. It's gonna upset the people that were expecting you to do a certain thing, or they were abusing you or exploiting you to do a certain thing. And so that's what happens, is that the people get upset, and the masters of this woman, they actually get Paul and Silas and his company, they get him thrown in prison. And it tells us, if you read in the book of Acts right there, it tells us that they got their clothes torn off of them, they got beat, and they're thrown in prison, and they're put in these stocks, and they're suffering. And the guy that did this to them all, the jailer, we're about to meet him right here. Here's what it says in verse 25. It says, but at midnight, Paul and Silas, they were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Again, notice this, they were praying. Again, God's about to do an amazing miracle, but Paul and Silas, again, they're praying once again. And I love this because like Paul had to be one of the most frustrating people to be around, they're like, Paul, if you don't quit preaching, all right, if you don't quit telling people about Jesus, we're gonna throw you in prison. He's like, do it. Then I'll just sing and pray and I'll tell the people in prison about Jesus. All right, well, Paul, we're gonna kill you, He's like, to die is gain. That would actually be a blessing to me. That's the quicker I get to go to heaven, And they're like, we can't kill the guy. Paul, we're gonna send you on a ship, it's gonna wreck, you're gonna get bit by a snake. He's like, then I'm gonna see a miracle of God. They're like, oh, what do we do with this guy, And so he's in prison and he's just making lemonade, y'all. Like he just knows, I'm not gonna let my circumstance dictate my joy. I'm gonna let my joy in Jesus inform my circumstance. And so I may be locked up, but I'm gonna pray and I'm gonna praise and trust that God's gonna do something in the midst of my praise. And so here's what happens in verse 26. It says, suddenly there was a great earthquake so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were loosed. This is a miracle. And it says, and the keeper of the prison, awaking from sleep and seeing the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. Some may think that's a little bit over the top, a little absurd that he would come in and think, oh, these guys are jailbreaking. I need to kill myself. But here's a guy that's trying to maintain his honor in this culture. That I don't know what would have happened. Like, maybe he thought, well, if these guys get free, then my boss is going to kill me. You think your work environment's bad, Could be worse, right? And so I'm just going to, or maybe there were benefits if he took his own life, it would be better for his family instead of, the shame that would come. I don't know. Or maybe here's a man that has wrapped up his identity in his work. And the moment that he fails at his job, he feels like he doesn't have any self-worth. So much so, he feels like he should kill himself. And so that's where this guy is. He's drawn his sword. He's about to take his own life. And I love this because Paul, he just steps in and he says this in verse 28. But Paul called with a loud voice saying, do yourself no harm, for we are all here. Man, I could just preach on that for a second. If you're here this morning and you have suicidal ideation, if you're here this morning and you're thinking, man, what use is there for me to live? Do yourself no harm, because we are all here and we love you and we will help you, and do not make a permanent decision in a temporary season. So Paul, that's what he says. He says, hey bro, don't do that. We're all here. Goes on, he says this. He says, then he called for a light, ran in and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. There was an earthquake that led to this situation, and now this man is quaking on the inside. It says, and he brought them out and said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? What a great question. And Paul and Silas are like, bro, hey man, what was your name again? He's like, whatever his name. And then he's like, hey, you're not gonna believe this. You're not gonna believe this. Like you think you gotta do a lot of stuff, but it's just crazy, man. Like Jesus, he did it all. You don't have to do anything. And he's like, man, Jesus gave everything, so you just simply get to receive the gift. And so he looks at this guy that's asking, what must I do to be saved? And he's like, man, here we go. You ready? Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved. And he says, you and your household. This is what Paul's saying right here in verse 31. He's saying, man, you give your life to Christ and you have no idea who's gonna be impacted by your life being changed by Jesus. Because dad is destiny. And if you'll give your life to Christ, it'll impact everyone in your household. He says in verse 32, then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And so this wasn't a transference of salvation automatically. Paul shared with everyone in their house. And when they saw dad's life changed by Jesus, it began to make them curious about how my life could be changed by Jesus too. And I love this in verse 33. It says, and he the jailer took them the same hour of the night and washed their stripes. You imagine how awkward that would have been? Because he was the one that striped them. Like he's got like the sponge. He's like, hey bro, sorry about that one. I got a little carried away, you know? Like we need mama get some thieves, you know, they're putting some oils on there, right? And he's like, man, that's my bad. I shouldn't have hit you there, you know? Like imagine how awkward that, and Paul's just kind of like, it's okay, man. You know, like that conversation. And then it says in verse 33 going on, it says, and immediately he and his family were all baptized. Verse 34, now when he had brought them into the house, he set food before them, and he rejoiced, having believed in God with all of his household. Point number 3, and finally, if you're taking notes, you can write this down, the soldier. The soldier. The third person that we meet is a hardened ex-military, blue-collar, jail keeper.